Our event this morning with Policy Exchange. I am really thrilled to see such a full room so early in the morning. We are talking today about fostering the technologies of the future. How can the UK become the superpower for digital technologies? So, why are we talking about this today? I think pretty much it's very, very much agreed now that digital technologies are going to massively change our world over the next few decades, and in fact have massively changed our world over the past few decades as well. And the UK, we're in a really good place to take advantage of this. Most lists, when you see how does the UK do for AI, we're probably maybe third after the US and China. If you ask how does the UK do on fintech, we're almost definitely the global hub for new payments technology. Similarly, any tracking for where does the UK go on in terms of startups, basically, you would think that Silicon Valley is probably the best place, then the East Coast of America, and then probably the South East of England. We're doing particularly well in this particular realm. On the flip side, the UK does not seem to be as good as other nations as capitalizing on this fantastic ecosystem. So, for example, France is about half the number of AI startups that we do, but French SMEs are almost twice as likely to be using AI technology in their day-to-day practices. Similarly, the UK is the e-commerce hub. We do the most spending per capita on online shopping, whereas we also have this long tail of unproductive small businesses that do not sell online at all. So the question here that we're going to try and answer is how can we make sure that the UK stays at the cutting edge of developing technologies, but also how can we make sure that we can benefit from them? I'll turn first to Secretary of State Michelle Donan for her comments.
Thank you very much. When I saw the topic of today, how can we become the envy of the world? In fact, I would argue we slightly are the envy of most of the world. We are one of only 3 countries that have a $1 trillion digital tech sector. So what we really need to focus on is how do we move away from being a challenger nation to the US and China. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We've got quite a step up now to go to that next level, but that's very much at the heart of my department's work. How can we get to be a science and tech superpower by 2030? We have a plan. One of the first things that I did as Secretary of State was lay out that roadmap, if you like, and all the things that we need to do across government, not just in my department, but across the whole of government to achieve that. It needs to be a coordinated and joint mission. And I think the fact that we now have, for the first time ever, a department dedicated to science, innovation and technology. We have the opportunity to drive this forward and to really bring together the different parts of government. I was previously Secretary of State for DCMS, so very much covering the digital aspect before. But it was extremely frustrating, I'm not afraid to tell you, because there would still be lots of other bits that were held by government, and having that overall oversight and responsibility was difficult and challenging. Now we have it in one area where we can be relentless in our objective for getting this done. But one of the things that I particularly wanted to do was bring in some external expertise. I think that to answer the question, the essay question for today, government can't do that alone. The reality is, government doesn't know all the answers, but business in particular and industry does often know the answers because they're right in the driving seat at the forefront. And that's why we tried to bring in all those expertise. We've got a record number of secondment schemes in my department. We've got an amazing non-executive directorship board, which really punches above its weight on the worldwide stage, let alone in this country. We've also set up things like the Frontier AI Task Force and established an expert advisory board where we've got some of the world's very best and brightest on AI to help us. But the message I've heard from industry, really to answer this question as to what is holding us back, what are the things that we can do to really successfully nail this agenda, fall into 3 categories. And they are skills, scale up, and regulation. And taking those in turn, so first of all, skills. We do, as a society, have to move away, and this was something that I worked on very hard in education as well, move away from this model that we've got ourselves into in this country, where you either go to college or go to university, and at a maximum of about 21, 22, that's it. You're done in terms of education for life. Whereas that doesn't work in today's world. People will be having multiple careers, and the rate at which technology is expanding means that we need to be able to support people to reskill and to upskill. And that's why we've got loads of programs like our boot camp initiative, like our apprenticeship initiative, like the LLE, which will come on in 2025. But it also means that we need to be investing in the right skills that industry needs, which is something that my department has been trying to lead on, especially in areas like AI. Then the second area is scale up. We're really good at this country at starting businesses. We're fantastic at it. But it's getting them to that next level that we find challenging. And I think we're losing too many great companies and great talent to countries like America. And we need to really examine that problem. Now, we've done some great work in this space, things like the Mansion House reforms, things like the expansion of the seed scheme, etc. But there's more that we could be doing, and that's an area of focus for me as well. Third one is regulation. I often think when you mention the word regulation to a conservative, the hairs on their back stand up. But I actually think regulation can be a positive thing too, because my mantra is about ensuring that we're regulating to innovate, giving that clarity, that certainty, that roadmap to industry, but also the type of regulation that they need, and looking at the regulatory behaviour. That was very much the theme of the balance review that came out earlier this year, because we can't have a situation where industry, who answers to multiple regulators, is getting different answers to the same question. That isn't encouraging growth, and it isn't encouraging sectors like the digital sector, and that's certainly another area of focus for me. Now, just lastly, before I pass over, I've talked quite a while, but there is a lot to say on this topic. I just wanted to touch on AI. Given the headline of this forum, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention AI, because I do see that as the accelerator in this agenda. And we all know that AI is a transformative technology. It is still emerging, but the rate at which it is developing is like nothing we've ever seen before. And if we sit back for a minute and think about where were large language models just 5 years ago, they couldn't even write coherent sentences. Now they can pass the bar, they can pass SATs, they can pass medical university examinations. Who knows what the models next year will be able to do. And that will offer incredible opportunities for mankind, but it also offers big risks. Well, it presents big risks. And that's why as a nation we need to grip those risks and those challenges. And so personally, I think that if we lead on AI safety, we will be able to continue to lead on AI. And the country that manages to do that will become the envy of the world in the digital agenda.
Thank you. Now going to turn to my right to Brian Quintez. Brian is global head of policy for A16Z, or Andreessen Horowitz. They're quite a famous venture capital firm. They were early investors in Twitter, Facebook, a whole bunch of like household names for tech companies. And they recently opened a London office. So Brian, would you like to tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, thank you, Ari, and thank you for Policy Exchange's leadership on this important issue and the report that came out today. I think there's a lot to dig in there, and thank you to the Secretary for your leadership on these very important issues. There was a lot to dig in and some very positive comments, especially around regulation and how to right-size it and calibrate it appropriately to foster innovation. So let me give you, I kind of wanted to do three things. I'll do two of them now and maybe save the third for later. The first is to introduce you to Andreessen Horowitz, and the second is to answer the question of why are we here, why the UK, why now? Andreessen Horowitz is a venture capital firm that was formed in 2008 in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, by Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. Mark was instrumental in kind of the founding of the internet and formed the first Netscape browser, and has taken the lead in a lot of very early stage venture investing in technology for a long period of time. We have about 28 billion pounds in committed capital. That's a measure of how much capital we're managing from our limited partners, from our investor base. It doesn't count the funds that we have raised and then distributed back, and it doesn't count returns that we currently have from those funds. It's just a measure of what size we're managing at this point. That is distributed across a number of different funds. We have a crypto blockchain fund, we have a bio fund, we have a fintech fund, venture, we're heavily into AI. I think one of the important takeaways that we'd like to push forward in all of our policy conversations is that we're very long-term investors. We have a 10-year time horizon at a minimum for our funds and for our investments. We are not traders. We're not a hedge fund. When it comes to blockchain and tokens, we do not flip tokens. We do not trade tokens, right? We're investing in very small teams that we think are going to create the apps and the software of the future that are going to build the networks, of the 21st century. And I think that that's an important segue into why we're here now. Historically, Andreessen Horowitz had only been U.S.-based. We had a number of offices in the United States, but we had never opened an office outside of the United States. And in June of this year, we announced that we were opening our first ever international office here in the UK, which is going to be opening here in November. And so why are we doing that now? Well, I think there are a couple reasons from the ecosystem's perspective, and then there are a couple reasons from the government's perspective. From the ecosystem's perspective, what we really look for when we're looking and trying to judge a jurisdiction is talent. Is there enough talent to support sustainable and continued investments and opportunities, right? As I've been involved with Andreessen, and I joined full-time in December and was an outside advisor for the previous year, what I've learned is that they don't view themselves as an investment firm. They view themselves as a talent firm. A number of times they hear the same idea from multiple people, and they're trying to evaluate the person or the team that is going to take that idea and turn it into the next big thing. And so the ability for a jurisdiction to foster talent and develop talent is what's going to create the opportunities for us, and we see that talent here. And there are two important things and aspects of the ecosystem that foster that and that allow it to thrive. The first is a strong university higher educational system. That is here in spades, and it's not just the Golden Triangle. In our conversations, and we've been on the ground recently, as I said, the north of the UK comes up frequently. It's not just Oxford, it's not just Cambridge, it's Leeds, it's Manchester, it's Liverpool, it's Newcastle, it's Belfast, right? So the university system is fostering the talent that we need to invest in the projects of the future. The second is a capitalist model. Right, a country dedicated to capitalist ideology that fosters innovation, that fosters entrepreneurialism, so that the talent that is coming out of those universities is incentivized to spend all of their time away from their friends, away from their family, nights and weekends, working really hard to build something that they have a passion for. So from the government's perspective, there are a number of things that we're embracing. The first is a dedication to innovation, technology, and investment. And as I look at the United States right now, I can't think of a time in the recent history, at the least, where we have been more negative to all three of those things. And this government, I think, in the UK, is incredibly positive to all three of those things, in nurturing them, fostering them, and driving towards trying to attract that. That is a very important thing for us as we are looking to deploy a lot of unused capital in the ecosystem. The second is a strong rule of law that's based on common law principles. I've interacted a lot with the EU in my time, formerly as a regulator in the United States. I think sometimes their heart is in the right place, but it's still a buyer beware mentality of what you get on the other side. And I think that the common law system that has its home here in the UK is something that is very attractive to us. And the third is a strong, credible, regulatory community. Right? What we don't want to do is embrace a regime that does not have a credible regulator, where those regulations can be reversed or changed, where you can provide clarity, thoughtful, agile, proportionate, flexible regulation that fosters innovation and protects consumers. And all of those words are things that we found in HMT's recent consultation on blockchain and crypto assets. So let me leave it there for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Julian David at the end of the table. Julian is the CEO of Tech UK, which is a trade association for the digital economy.
Thanks very much. What's a trade association? It's a gathering of businesses that are in the tech space. So we've got over 1,000 companies, from chips to clicks, as we put it, and very small companies right the way through to the national, international players that you would all know and recognize. And in particular, Secretary of State, we are, by definition, people who have scaled to a certain size, but they want to scale more. So getting to that, what's the situation? We are in a good situation in the UK. We have been leaders in many areas. The tech industry, the soundings from our members, is a lot more confident this year than last year, looking forward to the future. We have built on some great things here. We are a home for deep tech, and I think broader than AI. If you look beyond that, also into future compute, future networks, space, another area where the UK has really strong characteristics and capabilities. And part of that has really been built around the right approach by government to regulation, the right approach by government to selected investment. And I do echo, I don't often get too worried about or interested in machinery of government, but creation of DSIT, Department of Science, Innovation, Technology, is a really significant thing because it does give that focus right the way through from the start of an idea, right the way through to the deployment, and that is absolutely essential. And so we're very encouraged and confident, and it's nice to hear an outside view saying the same thing from Andreessen Horowitz. But what I would say is it's a global industry, and everybody is looking at what we've done. When I go around the world, when I talk to international companies, they say, well, people say, how did you do X, Y, Z in the UK? And they take ideas like the FinTech sandbox and things like that, some of the regulatory things that we've done, R&D credits in the early stages, etc. And they will copy these things and they will improve on them. So we have to be very clear on how we keep moving forward. And I would sum that up really in looking at similar lists in a way. Talent, again, when I talk to companies, they say, how do I make an investment decision? It is very much, is the talent here? They do then look at, is the regulatory and policy framework right? And then they get on to, and is the market adopting tech? Now, in each and every one of those areas, and I think you referred to this, the adoption of tech across the UK economy is not as fast as it is in some other places. And that really is important because one of the great advantages we have is a big enough market and a small enough market. We are big enough to matter and small enough to actually try things. So having flexible adoption of tech is very important, and I think we could do more to encourage that, Michelle. On the talent front, yes, we have fantastic researchers, fantastic universities, but we aren't doing enough, again, on general digital skills, and that's something that I think needs to be addressed. And then lastly, on the encouraging of growth and the area of regulation, the first thing I would say is that we have an idea for how we could address the scale-up issue, which is let's get everybody together. Let's do a scale-up sprint. I mean, this is a tech term, isn't it? But let's take 6 months. Get the tech industry, financial services, investors, city and region governments, with DSIT holding the pen there, and say, okay, what do we need to do to make everywhere as productive as the most productive hubs? And then on regulation and other things, we really need to have longer-term plans and consistency. The worst thing in the world is if there is doubt about what's going to happen or a change of direction. And that's really important. And I think you've set the scene for the policy directions of travel, but we need to keep to that track.
Thank you. Now, moving back to the other end of the table, we have Marcus Foster. Marcus is head of campaigns for the Startup Coalition, which I guess is a trade association for startups.
Yeah, so my name is Marcus Foster. I'm head of campaigns for the Startup Coalition. We were founded all the way back in 2010 when the UK's tech ecosystem was a few people messing around on laptops around about in Shoreditch. And we've grown since then in the same way that the tech ecosystem has. Our job is to make the UK the best place in the world to found a startup. And, we've already heard from the Secretary of State and from Aria as well, that we're doing a pretty good job with that. Holding our third place in terms of valuation of our tech sector is brilliant news, particularly in a world with a slightly more difficult market situation and needs a little more economic volatility than perhaps we're used to. Now the question is, how do we make sure not only are we challenging people like the US and like China, but also how are we making sure that some other countries who've seen what the UK has done and want to do it themselves don't end up overtaking us. And it's quite interesting speaking to some of our equivalent organisations, whether it's across Europe or in other parts of the world, it's quite hard not to be smug when you're in my position, because they have a real challenge getting their regulators and getting their politicians to take startups seriously and to take tech seriously. That's not a problem we've had, all the way since 2010 and over successive governments. But we're starting to see that other countries are waking up to this. And was one word. It's always fun when you end up going towards the end of the panel, because some of your points are already made for you. A word we've heard a couple of times today already is clarity, and that's something that I just wanted to zoom in on a little bit today, using crypto as an example, because there's a really useful point to be made here. When we saw John Glenn MP make a speech in April 2021 that the UK was open for crypto business, we wanted to be a world leader in crypto assets, and that the government wants to work proactively with regulators, with the industry, with other countries to make us the best place in the world to found a crypto business. That was the sort of clarity that our startups needed to know that whether we agreed or we disagreed ever so slightly on how we got to that end result, we knew that the government was fully behind that objective. Now, you could say crypto, you could say AI, like we're seeing real leadership with the AI Summit at the moment, or indeed fintech, and some of the work that's been going on since 2015, 2016 on fintech. But having that clarity and knowing that we're all pulling in the same direction is really, really helpful. Now, if I can be ever so slightly controversial, whilst we've seen a huge amount of leadership in tech generally, and particularly on crypto as well in the last couple of years from government, we haven't always seen that replicated to the same degree with some of our regulators. And I'm going to be very mean and pick on the FCA here, although it's not an FCA exclusive issue. A lack of clarity from regulators and sort of ambiguity about what the direction is that they're following makes it really, really difficult for our startups to thrive. They're having to ask themselves the question. We can see whether it's Jeremy Hunt or previously when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, we can see that the political leadership is there on crypto assets, but actually the day-to-day interactions I'm having with my main point of contact from the state, which for many of our startups is the FCA, we're not seeing that necessarily follow through. And some of our founders are sort of wonder sometimes whether the FCA wants them to be building their crypto business in the UK. More sort of boringly, they have to make an assessment about regulatory obligations. They have to make an assessment about regulatory risk, and that's very difficult when sometimes you see goalposts being moved. So, if I have a sort of challenge to government, a challenge to people around the table, I'm really keen that the leadership that we see all the way from number 10 through government departments around the cabinet table is pushed forwards into every nichest regulator, because we have some niche regulators and our startups deal with some very, very niche regulators. That all of that leadership is pushed to every single regulator, so we're all pulling in the same direction. And I think with that, whether it's crypto, whether it's AI, whether it's climate tech, whether it's anything else that we deal with on the tech front, we have a real chance of, not only maintaining our third place, but really challenging the US, China, and indeed any other countries in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Duff Gordon. Tom is Vice President for International Policy at Coinbase, which is a crypto exchange platform, and they are also opening a London office.
Thanks, Aria. Thanks, Policy Exchange. Thanks, Secretary of State. Great to be with you and see so many of you at 9 a.m. Coinbase, we are the biggest listed digital asset exchange. So you come to us to buy your Bitcoin and Ethereum, but we're also very big in Web3, where we have our own blockchain and we have developer tools, etc. Marcus just talked about Minister Glenn when he was EST, and he made that speech about the UK becoming a crypto kind of hub. That was a great signal to us, and we're US-based. But that was a big signal for us to increase our investment here in the UK. The UK is now, for Coinbase, our biggest international kind of office. We have about 300 people, and we're very excited about the opportunity here. We've been talking today about a cluster of technologies. I would almost say we're on the verge of this super cluster of new technologies that are coming in, whether that's virtual reality, whether that's the Internet of Things, whether it's blockchains, whether it's AI. We talk about them separately, but also they work together. And actually, AI and blockchain, I think that's really interesting to explore. AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, etc. But because of who we are in our company, maybe I can just dive into two areas where I think blockchain technology creates a huge opportunity, exciting opportunity for the UK. And those two areas are financial services And then the second is more broadly kind of Web3. So financial services is incredibly important, obviously, for the UK. We all know the tax contribution that it kind of takes, the global role of the City of London. But to stay competitive, we've got to make sure that the city is on the leading edge of kind of fintech, financial technology. And I think within that, crypto and digital assets is a huge, huge part. There are kind of two elements to that, payments and tokenization. The first is payments, where I think we can do a lot better, and that will really help to supercharge the economy. When everyone taps their credit card or their debit card, you think that's happening kind of fast and seamlessly. But in actual fact, that's a very kind of optimized front end, which is great. But behind the scenes, there's still a web of complicated bank-to-bank transactions that are happening. That means that ultimately the SME or the merchant probably doesn't get paid for a day or two, and it's probably going to cost 1, 2, 3, or even more than that percentage points. So we can do a lot better. And what blockchains does, the big revolution here, is peer-to-peer. So effectively, when you're playing using a stable coin or you're using some form of kind of crypto or a digital pound, effectively the money leaves you and it goes straight to the merchant almost instantaneously rather than through a web of banks. And that means it can be quicker, easier, cheaper, and faster. Checks still take 3 days to clear. Cross-border payments are expensive. They take days. All of these things can be dramatically kind of improved and increased using kind of blockchain technology. To say nothing about remittances, which is a huge global business, costs 6% on average a remittance. Using kind of blockchains, we can take that down to absolute fractions of that, and it can happen instantaneously. And then humanitarian aid, and some great examples of how cross-border aid to Ukraine, for example, has come through crypto faster than using the traditional system. So it won't just be money that's going to move on blockchain, and money will move either through the digital pound or through kind of stable coins or through tokenized deposits. But it's also going to be, I think, securities, so shares and also bonds that are going to move on blockchains as well in the future, and that's going to start happening. And that process we call tokenization. If we had a blank sheet of paper, we would never organize like the City of London the way we currently do, with just a web of different intermediaries all involved in the same kind of settlement and clearing of all these transactions, which is why it takes 3 days to settle kind of stocks and shares. Using blockchain technology, we can have what we call atomic settlement. So we go back to a bearer market, we go back hundreds of years, it's almost a bearer market, which means that as you kind of pay, you have settlement, and that is going to make everything much cheaper, much faster and better. But outside of financial services, and often I feel this conversation about kind of blockchain and crypto is shoehorned into financial services, and what's great about being here today and with the Secretary of State for DCIT is that actually it's much broader, because the blockchain and cryptography is going to provide actually the fundamental kind of base layer for the new infrastructure of the internet. So Web3, and this fantastic report that came out from Policy Exchange this morning, I urge you all to read it, talks a lot about Web3. Web 1 was when we just kind of read things from the internet. Web 2, which we're in now, is where you're kind of reading things from the internet, but you're also contributing kind of content. So you're putting things on Instagram and Facebook, etc. Web 3, we think, is the next massive wave of the internet, which is going to be when you can read, you write, but you also own. So it's going to be more decentralized. So you'll be able to own the content that you put onto the internet, and you're using cryptography and blockchains and tokens to manage that interaction. Often when I have conversations with policymakers, they say, we like blockchain, but we don't like tokens. And I think this report does a really good job of explaining how you just can't say that, because tokens are fundamental to incentivizing blockchains, and they're going to be fundamental to the way this new wave of the internet, Web3 as we call it, kind of works. So in the report, there are lots of examples around how blockchain can help in other creative industries, for example, so music. Justin Bieber, apparently, some of you will know, he launched a song as an NFT, a non-fungible token, and every time, if you buy that NFT, every time it's streamed, you get automatically a royalty, which is kind of cool, cutting out all the middle kind of men and women, and good thing. For ESG, I think carbon credits and tracking on supply chains, what happens with goods that you kind of buy from a carbon footprint perspective. I think there's a huge use case there for blockchains, decentralized social media, supply chains, etc. So that's the private sector. In the public sector, I think governments around the world, and my job takes me around the world, and there are a lot of governments looking at how can they deliver public services better using this technology. And so I think whether it's HMRC, the land registry, student loans, etc., maybe there's even a role for DCIT to put together some kind of sandbox or some kind of hackathon to think how do we get the private sector to come in and kind of co-create ideas with how we can deliver services better using this technology. I'll just finish by saying on what do we need. So the government has been terrific in their support for digital assets. So right from the Prime Minister, through to the Chancellor, through to the Treasury Secretary, really grateful for that kind of high-level support. I would just echo what Marcus says. It's so important that the government's ambition in this area is not kind of thwarted as we get into the rulemaking. And Secretary of State, you mentioned how important it is for regulation to protect downside risks, but also to foster innovation. And I think that's the balance that we've just got to be watchful and mindful that the FCA gets right. As they write rules in this sector, let's ensure that we foster this innovation, particularly because we're not just talking about financial investment, we're talking about consumptive uses of tokens in Web3, as I've kind of described. So I think the UK has a huge opportunity here as the US cracks down on this sector. That's the reason that I think Brian is here, that my company is investing so much. The US is actually going slow. There's a big opportunity for the UK post-Brexit as well to move nimbly to create these regulatory frameworks that are going to encourage all of us to invest and to help grow. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I'll start with a couple of questions that I'll direct the panel using my chair's privilege, and then I'll open to the audience. So first, Secretary of State. Our broader economic figures haven't looked fantastic in the UK, yet despite that, our venture capital investment has grown year on year much faster than the rest of the economy. OpenAI, Anthropic, A16Z, Coinbase, they're all opening offices here. Why do you think that we're bucking the trend so much this sector is bucking the trend so much compared to our broader economy? And what would you most like to do to try and use this sector to grow the rest of the economy?
So I think we have the right ingredients here in the UK, and that's why we are so successful in this area. We heard from industry and from representatives of industry today that they want to locate here, they want to grow here, because we do have, as I was talking about, those three things, the skills, scale up and regulation, but we've got to go further in each of them. So in particular, it was mentioned before about our world-class universities. We've got 4 out of the top 10 world-class universities here in the UK. And when it comes to skills and talent, we're awash of it, but we've got to grow that even more to develop it and move to the next level. And the same when it comes to regulation. We have that regulatory environment that sparks innovation, that gives that clarity and that certainty to business. And some other countries aren't providing that, and doesn't give the certainty to a business to locate or to grow, and to think that they know the roadmap that the government is projecting. I think that's why the creation of this department particularly helped, because it sent a big signal as well that we really mean it when we say all these things, that we want to double down on this agenda, that we want to create the right environment and foster companies to grow and be even more successful. And that's a model that then can be looked at and used in the rest of the economy. And when we talk about the digital aspect of the economy, we shouldn't be talking about it in isolation, because a lot of the technologies and the things that we've been talking about today are accessed across the board. Any corporation or company that wants to grow is going to have to embrace technology in the future. So what we're talking about here is not just one section of the economy, it's the entire economy. It really is the thing that's going to allow us to leapfrog to the next level.
Thank you. Julian, you mentioned the UK's deep tech and our tech adoption being quite low. Something that I found very interesting is our use of robotics is much, much lower when you compare us with other peer nations. And this, I think, is plausibly part of the reason we have quite low productivity in other areas. We've got a captive audience here. What would you like to see the government do for us to increase our use of productivity enhancing deep tech?
So I think it's about, following through on the policy directions that have been set. I tip my hat to the government in that the policy directions are set. And what we need to do now, and Marcus mentioned regulators, is this idea, and I do like the way the government's approaching AI, which is to have some guidelines in the centre and then to say to each sector, you need to now work out the best way to get the benefits and realise the opportunities of AI within your sector, and the regulators should work with you on that. What worries me a bit is do the regulators actually really have a growth mindset set in them, and that seems to me still some way to go on that. Do they have the resources and skills that really understand tech and the application of tech. And I think all of the people focused on financial services will say there's a lack there, but you can see it in other areas as well. And then what I would like to do is to say, okay, let's focus on areas where the UK does have a real edge, and there's sectors where that can be applied. So, for example, health tech and biotech. We're actually huge in the fundamentals again, the deep tech behind all that stuff, the genomics that started here. The DNA was analysed here and then sequenced here for the first time. So these things are in place. But does our NHS, do other industries in this space, the pharma industry and all the others, do they have the environment and the encouragement to actually start to drive this through? And I think one of the other things I would say to government is an idea that I think originated from you, Secretary of State, which is challenging the rest of government. How are you using tech, not just in the Treasury, but across the piece? That, I think, would be a real win if we could actually change the mindset there.
Thank you. Tom, you mentioned using sort of like Web3, AI, digital technologies for public services. Which public services do you think are most ripe for the picking? Like where would you most like to see us upgrade?
Oh, gosh, good question. I think you have to look at those public services, anything with a huge amount of records and ledgering that's necessary, or where there's a lot of reconciliation between different databases. I think that's what this technology does extremely well, is it helps to keep an immutable kind of record. So whether that's the health bank that we have with the NHS, which is kind of unique really to the UK in some senses, or whether that's something as simple as just the passport office. I just think there are multiple different areas that we can kind of look at where we've got complex kind of databases that are all reconciling, where we can just use blockchain technology to do that faster and more efficiently and effectively. So what do I think? And I think my colleague just mentioned it. Maybe there needs to be more kind of cross-government thinking about how to kind of leverage the technology, because the conversation is very financial services and HMT at the moment, and maybe it can be kind of broader. And I know that individual departments are starting to look at that, but I'm sure there are going to be huge synergies if we start to kind of really bring this together, and maybe there's a role for DCID or other kind of horizontal kind of axes across government to see where the advantages really are.
Excellent. Marcus, your general sense of your comments I got was that you're very happy with the narrative coming from government about technology, but that the regulators aren't so friendly. Why do you think there's this disconnect, and what do you think we can do to make sure that we're sort of working together as like a unified government?
I mean, if you ask me why, I think it's typical of any regulator anywhere in the world to be quite risk averse. We see that amongst our regulators to a certain extent. I mean, the consistent and thorough leadership that we see from government has, I did have a bit of a moan in my speech, but following that April 2021 speech, we did see a real improvement from once again the FCA on their attitude, and they hosted a number of crypto sprints, which I think were really helpful, both in terms of giving them the information that they needed when they started looking at regulating this stuff, but also to sort of bring in a fresh approach where I say, no, we're here to listen, we're here to learn. And I think where regulators have done that and literally said, let's reset here. And I'm sure, on the AI side, the AI Summit is a perfect way of doing that. And I think that's really given clear strategic leadership and direction to regulators. So more of that essentially. And I would say this, but the government continuing to talk about tech as much as they do would be really, really helpful, because that gives not only the markets clear guidance that we're serious about this stuff, but also the regulators as well.
And Brian, finally, I'm really glad to have you give us sort of like an international perspective here. You've talked a lot about why you're happy to have a base here in the UK. What would you most like to see next that makes you even more enthusiastic about that decision?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to bridge a number of comments that I was just hearing around kind of regulators and innovation, because I was a regulator in the United States. I was a commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which is the derivatives regulator. We separate the securities markets and the derivatives markets in the United States between two different regulators. And my experience is that regulators and innovation do not go well together. The incentives aren't aligned. To your point, they are risk averse, and in order to really put your reputation on the line to embrace something new where you only get the downside risk, and you never get the upside credit. They really need the backing of government, to do that. And I think one of the very important things that I've seen recently is the implementation of the secondary objective by HMT into the FCA for a competition mandate. I think that is something that should be embraced. It's absolutely appropriate to do. And as they look to deploy that, I think they will need continued support. But overarchingly, I mean, as our firm kind of over the last 20 years had a thesis that technology was going to be driven by three main things that created a flywheel effect that all reinforce each other. It was mobile, it was social, and it was cloud. Right? Mobile provided kind of the infinite access to the system or the technology. Mobile provided the networks that linked everyone together, and cloud provided the infrastructure to do that. Going forward, to Tom's point that he had made earlier, we kind of see the next 20 years being driven by the flywheel of blockchain, AI, and virtual reality, where AI is the generator of content, blockchain is the authentication mechanism and the ownership mechanism, and AR, VR can be the experiential or the access point to those things. And as we think about kind of at least the blockchain aspect and the AI aspect, the regulatory approaches to those things are going to be critical to how fast that flywheel turns. From a blockchain perspective, governments and regulators are going to need to embrace concepts around decentralization. And I was very encouraged and excited to see a discussion of decentralization and its importance and what it means here, and Tom touched on that. That's what allows someone to own something that a token represents, right? It's the difference between owning a house and renting a condo, right? If you own it, it's yours. If you rent it, someone can take it away from you. They can change the rules. It's not yours. You don't get the upside. You can't contribute to it. It's the same thing here. And decentralization is what allows that, right? It's also the difference between kind of, in a government language, an executive order versus a ballot initiative, right? We can debate around how decentralized the ballot is, the voting process is, how many voters participated in that, but they are different systems and they represent different things. So we believe that the decentralization aspect of Web3 needs to be embraced and recognized in regulation and legislation, and we think the UK is poised to do that. Similarly with AI, I think we see AI as a very centralizing force. AI depends on two things, a lot of data and a lot of capital, and the entities that have both of those are big tech. And if we want to make sure that AI is democratized, we need to make sure it remains open source. If it becomes closed, as a closed source system, it's going to be the domain of big tech. We're going to get big tech 2.0, and it's going to be the loudest voices, the biggest bullies that control outcomes for us, as opposed to enforcing against bad uses of it. So we think those are two very primary important things that governments can do to embrace technology.
Great, thank you. And now I'll open up to questions from the floor. We've got a roving mic at the back. Can we get one question here at the front? I'll do three, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Claire Cummings from Cummings Pepperdine. Secretary of State, I think everybody here would agree that we're not just seeing a flourishing, but an absolute boom in this industry. And the Conservative government is much to thank for the work they've done with regulation and policy. However, I don't see how anybody can run a business without a bank account. And it's virtually impossible to get a bank account if you say to a bank that you're involved in blockchain, crypto, or digital assets. Is there anything that could be done about that, please?
And this gentleman at the front here.
James Pett, I work in AI. So how do we ensure we are regulating the right things? From my point of view, it's fairly easy to move data to another country and train models there if necessary. So how do we ensure that we're regulating the right things to ensure that these models are trained here opposed to abroad?
And then at the very back of the room.
Thank you. I'm Douglas Hanson-Luke. A question for the Secretary of State and for the panel. I'm area chair for Cambridgeshire, but in this capacity, I'm actually the chairman of Future Planet Capital. We're a global university venture fund We've been managing £100 million for your department for the last 20 years. And it's shown the power of early stage capital to make a difference. We've invested in nuclear fusion, we've invested in all sorts of other companies and brought in about 30 times the money from the private sector that the public's put in. So it's worked. But the challenges that we see are on scale up. The biggest challenge there. So the question to you is, can you expand this to the growth stage? And can government actually respond faster? So we've had a sovereign fund for the last 3 months that wants to do something with fusion in Britain, but can't get an answer from Treasury. That's one example. We've got others where we've had companies that want to scale up, but haven't been able to, on the AI front, but have been selling out to American or other international rivals because it's difficult to get that scale-up capital here in Britain.
Okay, those are going to be quite difficult to synthesize together. But unbanking, regulating the right things in AI, scale-ups, and faster response from government. Which of those would you like to address?
Oh, okay. So I think I'll start with the AI regulation point. So what we did was we published our white paper earlier in the year, and it laid out the principles that we want all regulators to be working to, and they included things like safety, contestability, fairness, accountability. And that was ensuring that we have consistency across our regulators, because we were finding that, especially as this is a new and emerging technology, that they were going off on different tangents, which didn't provide that clarity and that certainty that we've been talking about today. But I think how do we then keep evolving is making sure that we're working and supporting our regulators. One of the points that was made before was, what about them not having the skills, or it being something that is just a step too much for some of our regulators? And that's why government has to bridge that gap, especially in the interim. And that's why we've established a central risk function within government, so that we can almost do some of the horizon scanning for the regulators and work with them. And then looking to the long term, of course, we need to be listening. We need to be listening to the experts, which is exactly why we set up our AI task force with some of the best and the brightest. We've got people like Yoshua Bengio, who is seen as one of the godfathers of AI, and other world-renowned experts that are helping us to understand the risks as well as the opportunities. Because the reality is, some of the technology we've been talking about today, nobody fully knows yet the full extent of the risk that it poses or the opportunities. Other question that was asked was on scale-up. This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's partially why I have a job, if we're honest, and something that we have to do better on in this country if we are going to reach that goal that we've set ourselves, that mission of becoming a science and tech superpower. Some of the framework that we've set out, the 10-point plan, will address this point. Some of the work that we've already been doing, like the Mansion House reforms, etc., will indeed help push us forward. But it's something that we need to be relentless on and look at our international competitors and take learnings from them. And on the bank account issue, I'm keen to know the experiences of others on the panel, but certainly it's something that we are exploring with my other ministerial counterparts, because we want to remove some of the barriers as well. I see my job as a minister in this role to enable business to help us to achieve this goal of being a science and tech superpower. It's not the government that's going to do it, it's industry that's going to do it. And my job is to remove some of those barriers and allow you to move forward.
Excellent. Tom, some thoughts?
I was going to come in on the debanking point, which I think is a really, really important one. It's going to be very hard to deliver on the government's ambition, the Prime Minister's ambition, to make the UK a Web3 hub if Web3 businesses can't get bank accounts. And I think that is the lived experience of a lot of people, in this sector. I think there are two elements to that. One is, setting up a company and just being able to do payroll for your kind of staff and getting a bank account for that. That's been very, very tricky for a number of, different kind of players in the industry. The second is, for a company like ours, we've experienced, and it's been in the press over the last few weeks, that banks are putting in place arbitrary kind of bans and limits on people that want to move money from their personal account to a regulated digital asset exchange. And that seems strange to us. And I think what is missing, and where maybe government can use its convening power to help, is to bring all the actors around the table. Because I can't sit here and say that the banks are acting, completely mindlessly in some senses, because unfortunately, there is some fraud, there are scams in this industry, and we all need to come together to work better to ensure that we reduce that. But what we need is a kind of a round table where we can have not just the crypto companies, but we need to have the banks, we need the social media platforms, and we need the telcos. We need almost the life cycle, because a lot of these frauds and scams, they don't start with crypto. They start with a text message, or they start with something on Meta or Facebook or whatever it happens to be. So I think we're just missing, that kind of that round table to have that discussion, such that we can avoid a situation where genuine, legitimate businesses that are really, working to drive this new, exciting technology transformation ecosystem just cannot get access to financing. And so we talked about scale-ups, but if you can't get a bank account to pay your staff, you can't get going in the first place. So I think it's a really pressing issue that we've got to try and address.
And Julian?
So a couple of things. One is scale up. I'd like to stress scale out as well, which is really about taking advantage of the UK marketplace, a number of areas where we do have potential to be a really attractive place for companies to bring new innovation in. A lot of talk's been going on about financial services, but you can look at other sectors as well, particularly health, where we do have that. And I would like to, again, another compliment to your department, Secretary of State. But the UK approach to data is very interesting because we spend a lot of time, and again, a big shout out to the government. The last months, there's definitely been a huge interaction with industry, and that's allowed us to have what I think is a really world-leading, I'll use that phrase, approach to data regulation, where consistency with global standards, proper protection where it's needed, but a lot of space for innovation. And I think those kind of approaches will really drive people to invest here, and then we'll get the scale out, which means we become a digitized economy, and that's a big prize for us.
I think on that, the difference in the approach that we did was we said, I was particularly keen when I came into the department that we actually co-authored that legislation with industry, and I think the proof's in the pudding there, that it actually is fit for purpose, and as you say, will be world leading, and will free up a lot of the administration and barriers that businesses have faced.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, so maybe two quick points. The first on the debanking issue. I don't think we have enough experience here in this market to really adequately talk about that. I did notice that JP Morgan Chase just announced a blanket ban on all crypto deposits and crypto clients, which I don't think is encouraging. But at least my reaction to what I've seen or been hearing is that it is more driven by banks themselves making those decisions, whereas in the United States, I think there's a strong suspicion that it is actually being driven by the regulators telling the banks that they are not allowed to bank crypto businesses. So at least it's not that bad. But I think it's important that legal businesses, regulated businesses, do have access to financial services. And again, these, in the most cases, these are deposit accounts, right? This is not a lending activity. It's not a credit risk for the bank. There are examples in the United States where we can't even send founders a check for our investment because they can't get a bank account. I mean, that's ridiculous. And so if we do want this ecosystem to grow there, here, that is an integral part of it. And I think maybe the second question on scale-up capital, we hope that's our sweet spot. We are very focused on Series A and also Series B funding. But I would also say that at least what I've seen, and I'm not on the investment side, I'm on the policy side, but blockchain and blockchain-based projects have an incredible ability to scale with very few, resources and people. And while that might not translate directly into jobs, we do think that that will translate significantly into economic growth and wealth creation.
Great, thank you. Marcus?
Yeah, so back in April this year, we hosted a dinner for crypto startups. The oldest company there was founded at the start of 2021. Everyone was positively ancient in the crypto world. Everyone there was either raising their pre-seed, raising seed, or had just closed their seed round. So these are young companies, really innovative stuff. Some of the stuff that we've heard today about tokenization, etc. These are the people building it. No one was on their first bank account. Everyone was on at least their second bank account because when the bank arbitrarily, without any notice, said, no, you can't bank with us anymore. it wasn't simply that people were getting refused bank accounts. It was that they were getting granted bank accounts, and then someone somewhere in the offices of their bank realized what they did in terms of business. This could be prompted by something as simple as a website change, where they sort of changed how they described their business, and they would instantly lose their bank account. And more than one founder around that table said, when we get big enough, we're going to be moving from the UK somewhere where the banking environment is safer for us, because it's a real risk when we're building an alternative payment system, an alternative way of people sending money from one place to the other, and we don't know if our account is going to be locked on any given day. That's not really a sustainable model for us. So I think just because I heard someone mention lived experience, that is the lived experience of many of our crypto founders at the moment in terms of the banking side of things and access to banking. What I would say, though, is that it's not specifically a crypto problem. We see startups across, we do everything from AI to quantum to climate tech to health tech to regular fintech as well. Across that full suite of sectors, whilst it's not as hard as if you're doing crypto, it's still quite difficult to run and keep your bank account. And obviously that is a huge source of stress for founders when they should be concentrating on growing and they want to be concentrating on growing and scaling their business. So I think, I think part of the problem we have with this is that it's not immediately obvious where the problem lies. Is it guidance from the FCA? Is it Treasury guidance to the FCA? Is it a commercial decision being made by the banks? I haven't got an answer for you on that. I think perhaps it could well be a mix of all three. So I think getting everyone around the table, as has been mentioned, and getting to the bottom of this, I think would be a huge boost for the tech ecosystem in the UK.
Thank you so much. I thought we'd have time for another round of questions, but I don't think we do. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to our panel. Today, we have released our newest report from the Science and Tech Unit here at Policy Exchange. It's called Web3 Democratizing the Internet. I'm hoping you will all enjoy the read. And we also have a piece in City AM from our Director of Research talking about what we discuss here and what we've discussed on the panel today. Thank you so much for coming.